Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. לעולם לא נשכח את מעשה הזוועה שעשו לנו אויבינו. אנחנו הולמים באויבינו בעוצמה חסרת תקדים. אני מדגיש, זאת רק ההתחלה. They've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
Israel has responded with fury. Fighter jets taking aim at targets in the Palestinian territory.
More than 10,000 people have been killed since this conflict began.
As the Israel-Hamas war drags on, backlash against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is growing at home. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has heavily criticized Netanyahu.
He's the worst person to have to deal with it. I think that he is really in a nervous breakdown. A person who has portrayed himself and presented himself for many years as Mr. Security failed in the most fundamental obligation for his citizens, which is to provide them with security.
Today, Netanyahu's leadership is on the verge of imploding, deeply unpopular with his own people and under immense pressure from the international community.
La lutte doit être sans merci, mais pas sans règles.
This is a fall from grace for a man who was reportedly told by one of the most powerful Jewish religious figures in the world that he would be the one to welcome the Messiah. "40 years ago, when Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, he met Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, known simply as the Rebbe.
He said, you're going to this house of darkness, the UN, which was very, very unfriendly to Israel at the time. He called it the house of darkness. And he said, even in the greatest darkness, if you light a candle, it spreads a great light that can be seen from afar.
The Rebbe reportedly believed Netanyahu had a mission from God to prepare Israel for the coming of the Messiah, or in Hebrew, the Moshiach. Over the next decade, the two men developed a close relationship. Soon after entering Israel's parliament for the first time, Netanyahu paid his respects to his mentor.
Back then, Netanyahu was probably the only ally that he could work with in Israeli politics. He obviously demands from Netanyahu to take some steps to hasten the coming of Messiah, which is to make Israel a more religious place and to take certain concrete steps in this regard. And Netanyahu says, I'm definitely doing that.
The Rebbe never visited Israel, not once, and yet from his home in Brooklyn, he was able to influence Israeli politics. His influence was recognized by American politicians too. US presidents paid homage to him, establishing and proclaiming a National Education and Sharing Day in honor of his birthday.
And please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this his 86th birthday.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson was born in 1902 in the Black Sea port of Nikolaev, which was part of the Russian Empire but now part of Ukraine. He and his wife lived in Berlin and Paris before fleeing the Nazis in 1941, seeking refuge in New York, where they put down roots. A decade later, in 1951, he took over the Chabad movement from his father-in-law, who died the previous year. Menachem Schneerson revived and grew the movement for over 40 years until his death in New York in 1994. His followers in Brooklyn were devastated.
Most of them believed he would never die. They still believe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson will be physically resurrected as Mashiach, the Messiah.
A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
Currently, the center of the Chabadic movement is in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Crown Heights. So it is an American movement in terms of its center, but it is also a global movement. One of the biggest purposes of Chabad is to bring those quote-unquote lost Jews back into Judaism. So Chabad has its own rabbis and emissaries appointed all around the world. It is a global movement.
Headquartered in Brooklyn, the Chabad movement has a presence in every state in America and in over 100 countries around the world, with a particularly high focus in Europe and in Israel. It has hundreds of thousands of followers and runs synagogues, schools, drug rehabilitation centers, and care homes. On the face of it, the movement has been for the betterment of Jews around the world. But according to one analyst, its modus operandi has provided a template for a terror group.
We have good reasons to believe that Fatah got inspired from the Chabad movement. One of the high-ranking members of the Fatah movement was praising the Chabad movement in the sense that the Chabad used to send its emissaries and rabbis all around the world, just like Fatah was doing, sending out teachers to Central Asia and to Africa and to other parts of the world.
For over 40 years, the charismatic Rebbe led the movement. His $1 donations, including to Netanyahu, came with a blessing to his followers and a reminder to give to those less fortunate. A couple of years after this meeting, the Rebbe reportedly told a young Netanyahu that he would one day become Prime Minister of Israel and would be the nation's last leader before handing the scepter to the Messiah. This first part of the Rebbe's prediction came true in 1996, when a 47-year-old Benjamin Netanyahu became Prime Minister for the first time. But his government fell just 3 years later. For a while, Netanyahu withdrew from politics. The Rebbe's words faded into history until a decade later, Netanyahu became Prime Minister for a second time.
העם רוצה שינוי. העם רוצה ללכת בדרך אחרת. הדרך שלנו ניצחה. היא הדרך שתוביל את העם.
Netanyahu's second premiership lasted for over 12 years, until he was eventually ousted by his political opponents. Another setback for anyone who believed in the Rebbe's messianic prophecy.